Good day. Um, I decided to do this short, perhaps slightly mischievous video in light of a unexpected outcome of the vast spending splurge in the United States that the Biden-Harris administration has engaged in. I say vast spending splurge, even though so far the greater part of it perhaps has not yet hit. But it seems, according to some figures, that already total government and spending provided by through stimulus packages by the Federal Reserve Board and quantitative easing and all the rest means that the financial input into the US economy is now currently running at something like $8 trillion a month. That was a figure I read. I found it somewhat astonishing, but some say that it is true. Anyway, regardless of that there's been a massive spending splurge and that it is growing, I think is indisputable. And one of the unintended byproducts of that is that it is making the US's adversaries richer. Now, let's first of all look at China. China increased its exports to the United States last year and will probably continue to expand them further this year. There were some lurid stories at the start of this year of US ports on the West Coast struggling to cope with the vast influx of goods from the Far East, from Asia, not, by the way, just China, but all the various Asian producers, and running into massive capacity constraints with ships, with freight, waiting to be unloaded and floating around near the US, the West Coast ports, in order to do so. The latest word, by the way, is that this massive splurge of imports somewhat slackened off in the first few months of this year as US production rose as the pandemic restrictions were lifted, but it's likely that it will start to grow again over the next few months as all this vast spending package intensifies. I say that because it's very difficult to see how the US can absorb all this spending on the basis of its own production, and that almost inevitably means importing more goods, more finished goods from the Far East, from Asia, and that of course means principally China. Anyway, that's one effect of all of this. Another is that all this huge spending is putting pressure, obviously downward pressure, on the dollar, and is causing the currency, the Chinese currency, the RMB or the yuan, to appreciate. The net effect is that Chinese foreign currency reserves held by the central bank in Beijing have now increased to a staggering $3.2 trillion. In the meantime, the Russians are seeing something similar happen to themselves. Russia's major exports, as of course everybody, we're constantly reminded, are not manufactured goods, though actually Russia's manufactured goods exports have been increasing quite significantly over the last few years. But the Russians mainly and principally support commodities, namely oil and gas, and increasingly grain. And again, one of the effects of this vast spending splurge across in the United States is that as it puts downward pressure on the dollar, it is causing food and energy prices around the world to skyrocket. Oil is now, Brent crude is now touching $70 a barrel, and there is talk that it might increase to $100 a barrel, perhaps by the end of this year. Food prices around the world are skyrocketing also, as one of the world's major exporters of oil and gas, and as the world's biggest exporter of food, Russia is seeing the money pour in. And unsurprisingly, their foreign currency reserves have now also increased to $590 billion. While that may seem small compared to China's $3.2 trillion on a per capita basis, it is actually greater, and all the indications are that the Russian reserves are going to continue to grow. What makes that, by the way, even more interesting and more paradoxical is that the United States is assisting Russia to grow its reserves in another way, which is by threatening constantly to impose more and more sanctions on Russia. It is keeping the ruble at a much lower valuation than on market terms the ruble should have. Most people I've discussed this with think that a proper valuation of the ruble on a pure market basis would be around 50 to 60 rubles to the dollar. It's now around 70 to 80 rubles to the dollar, a fact which has made the Russian economy and Russian exporters exceptionally competitive on international markets. Anyway, that's by the way. Now, of course, all this vast growth of food and oil prices is causing some problems within the Russian economy itself. Inflation there has spiked in the last few weeks, and that's compelled the central bank to increase interest rates by 50 base points. However, the Russians can cope with that, and they're confident that inflation will fall back, and interest rates also, within a few months. We shall see. But the interesting paradox of all this again is that as the Russians take steps to rein in their inflation, and the Chinese apparently are doing the same, the United States is continuing to run its economy exceptionally hot. There is no sign for the moment of the Federal Reserve Board showing any willingness to increase interest rates or to tighten monetary policy in any way. Everybody now accepts that that means higher inflation in the United States and the West, though nobody agrees by how much. Officially, it is expected that it will peak at the highest point. Its highest point will be at no more than 4% and might be less, and that before long inflation will fall back. I'm not quite sure that I understand or follow the logic of this, why the officials in the United States expect that as they continue to engage in monetary and fiscal stimulus on this Homeric scale, that inflation will indeed fall back. I would have thought, on the contrary, that we will see the US economy facing growing capacity constraints, which will logically lead to higher inflation. But there we are. That's the assumption. And I have to say that there are some people who don't share it. I was reading a very interesting article by Ambrose Evans Pritchard in the Daily Telegraph. He started from being an enthusiastic advocate of the Biden-Harris administration's fiscal and monetary expansion. He's now become increasingly concerned and has become indeed something of a critic. And he has reminded his readers in the Daily Telegraph that when the United States government did something similar in the 1940s, directly following the end of the Second World War, the result was that inflation in 1947 actually touched 17%. Well, we shall see. I would add that in 1947, the US had by far the world's biggest manufacturing economy, and of course it had far greater scope to raise interest rates than it does today. How the United States today would respond to inflation on anything close to that scale, I have no idea. I think raising interest rates would be extremely difficult. And my guess is that rather than do that, we would probably see one of two things happen. Either the United States would let the dollar fall, which might lead to still more inflation, at least in the short term, or more probably at some point we would start to see a huge mass of spending cuts in the United States as the US authorities began to realize that this whole policy of boosting the economy in this way is unsustainable. Well, regardless of that, the fact remains that the Chinese and the Russians are seeing their war chests grow. Moreover, if we do see $100 oil by the end of this year, which I think is highly likely, and if we also see the US trade deficit with China increase, which I think is also likely, those figures for the respective reserves of the two countries, $3.2 trillion in the case of China, $590 billion in the case of Russia, will probably be very considerably exceeded. At a time when the United States still considers or thinks about or talks about imposing sanctions upon these countries, it might take stock of the fact that its own economic policies are making the sanctions weapon less effective by increasing the war chests, the financial war chests that both of its two main rivals have. Moreover, if the value of the dollar falls, as many people expect and as some people fear, then of course the Chinese and the Russians will be in an even stronger position than they are now, especially as they move forward with their various digital currency ideas and their replacements for the SWIFT interbank payment system. Anyway, we live, as they say, in interesting times, and it might be important also to remind certain people in the US government that actions, particularly reckless actions taken on this scale, can sometimes have unintended and unexpected consequences. Thank you for joining me for this program, short video on this channel. Please check me out for future videos, both on this channel and on our main channel, The Duran. And please also remember to check out my colleague Alex Christophorou's channel. Find links under this video. Please also look us up on our various platforms, Odyssey, SuperTube, and also Locals. Again, you'll find links under this video. And please also support us to the extent that you can through Patreon, Subscribestar, and PayPal. And last but not least, check out our Discord server, check out our shop, look up the wonderful things you will find there, our famous magic mugs, our t-shirts, our hats, our hoodies, our sweatshirts, and all the rest. And I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please remember to press the like button, and please also subscribe. Remember to check your subscription to this channel. We have lots of comments from viewers who tell us that they have been mysteriously unsubscribed. Well, given that that is so, please check that you are indeed subscribed so that you can continue to get notification of our videos. Thank you very much for joining me today, and I look forward to you joining me in future programs on this channel, and have a wonderful day.